Okay, folks are telling me it's working. So we're going to go ahead. I'll scroll quickly through the introduction slides here, and we'll get rolling with our webinar. Today's webinar is Telling Your Story, Sharing Your Success with Media, the Community, and Funders. Today's panelists are myself, Chelsey Simpson. I'm the Communications Manager for the National Farm to School Network. And on the line with me is Stacey Malstrom, our Public Relations and Outreach Manager for the National Farm to School Network. And this is Stacey's first webinar to join us on. She joined the National Farm to School Network in October. So we're excited to have her here today. And she's going to get us rolling with our first slide by telling us why stories are important.
Thanks, Chelsey. We just wanted to start things off by kind of setting the stage for why we're talking about stories today and storytelling in general. One of the ways stories are important is to help you reach new people. So one of the biggest opportunities that you have in taking and packaging your story in a really compelling, motivating way is to help reach new people that might become supporters in your community, partners with your organization, or volunteers, and also following through that, potentially individual donors. So it can help you with securing funding as well, really being able to tell that story in a succinct, charismatic way. And that's what we're talking about today, is how to create that really well-packaged story to broaden your awareness around your program. It's also great in grant applications and through media outreach, which we're going to touch on specifically towards the end of the presentation on how to put it into practice in reaching out to media to help validate your work. So that's sort of where we're headed today, and Chelsey's going to take us through some do's and don'ts around great storytelling and how to put that piece together so that it's easy to communicate to new people. Chelsey, I think you might still be on mute mode.
Okay, great. Thanks, Stacey. I'm going to get us started with a few storytelling don'ts. So for starters, what isn't a good story? And we get a lot of these with the National Farm to School Network. We get a lot of stories in general, and we get a lot of examples that are really stellar, and we get a lot of examples that are really great of retellings of events, but they don't necessarily tell a story. So what doesn't make a good story? A list of activities doesn't make a good story. So if you tell me that you had this fantastic school garden day and you just run through these garden stations and you tell me about a lunch that you had for local farm to school leaders, but you don't really go into detail, that's what I'm saying when I'm talking about a list of activities. An unoriginal event or activity, for example, school gardens, this is an item where we're really a victim of our own success. So luckily, farm to school work has become so prominent now that a lot of our stories aren't as unique as they were 5 or 10 years ago, or even 3 years ago. So it used to be that if you had a great school garden in your elementary schoolyard, that was going to be novel. That was going to get the attention of your local news media. It was going to get the attention of funders, potentially your community. Now there might be school gardens in, all over the place in your community. It's something that people have seen covered in the news a lot, and it's just not going to grab attention that well. So we're going to move on now to some of the things that make a good story. I just want to mention this photo too. This photo and the photo in my next slide were taken at the same event. And I'm going to give you a little bit of an example of do's and don'ts with these pictures as well. So this picture we can see we're pulled out, and we don't really see a lot of detail. We see what's going on. These are people and they seem to be at some kind of a training, but we see the backs of a lot of heads and the lighting's not stellar. Here's a photo from the same event. And here we have a personality front and center. We have a smiling face. We can tell what's a little bit more about what's going on. And this leads into the idea of what makes a great story. So great stories have a beginning, middle, and end. Great stories have good characters. Great stories have a why now element that makes them relevant for the moment. And this one's especially important for getting media attention for your story. And then photos matter, as we were talking about already with these last two slides. So what I'm saying, just taking this event, for example, this was a school food service training that I went to in New Jersey. And if I told you that I went to this training, we sat through an hour of knife skills demonstration, and then 30 school nutrition directors from around the state got to practice their knife skills in a kitchen under the supervision of a chef, you would probably think that was great, but it might not be as compelling as if I told you about the story of a particular school food service director, this woman, for example. If I told you how frustrated she was that she wasn't able to incorporate local vegetables because she didn't have the proper skills and equipment to process them, she came to the training. I could give you some examples of the things she learned, the things she tried, and then I could tell you how she was able to take that back to her community and transform food service on their school salad bar. And I could show you this great photo of her at the training in action. So that's an example of what I mean when I say a story versus a list of events. Find your characters, find your beginning, find what the problem was, find your middle, give details about what took place, and then find your end. What were the results? And I think this is key, not just for getting media attention, but also for when you're talking to funders, when you're talking to the community, when you're talking about members that might become funders, when you're trying to engage parents. You need to show cause and effect and transformation. And you want to show them people that matter. So a couple other quick examples of this. And I know this is a lot to read on the screen, but this is a could be better story. This is an example, like I was mentioning before, where someone runs through the list of activities at their garden. And this is super exciting. Someone submitted this story, and I've edited it a little bit, but they submitted this to our website. We have a story forum, which I encourage you all to use. We'd love to hear stories from people around the country about farm to school activities going on, and we love all of them. So I don't want to give anyone the wrong idea, but here's an example where they've ran through the activities that happened at their event. Students went from one station to another in the garden. They met different breeds of chickens. Last but not least, they picked out 3 different varieties of plants to take home and share with their families, and the trip was a great success. So this is fantastic. We all are pleased that this happened, but it's not as enigmatic as this story, for example. So here, this story starts out, and it sets the scene for us. It says, we're a small 4-acre diversified farm. We chugged along modestly, tilling and harvesting our crops, but always just scraping by. So here they've outlined the problem. They were just scraping by. Then they talk about the solution, and they give us the detail that they got a USDA Farm to School grant, which is fantastic, because that's something that, we really want to know about for purposes of advocacy. And they say this grant enabled them to grow sweet potatoes, radishes, sugar snap peas, etc. And then they tell us the results. They say our farmers take enormous pride in knowing that their produce is regularly on the cafeteria plates of over 5,000 children. Just in time for Farm to School Month, they had their largest delivery ever, and it's time to buy a new van. So these are wonderful specifics, beginning, middle, end. We don't know the farmers really just from the story, but we've mentioned that this project has made them happy. And look, they even sent along the photo. So this isn't necessarily the absolutely best photo that could have ever been taken, but it's great. I mean, smiling faces. If I was an editor, I would at least be interested enough to maybe send my own photographer out to this farm. And if I was a partner organization, this is perfectly great for including on my blog. In fact, we did put this story on our blog, and we've shared it on social media. So just to say a little bit more about the value of good photos, any photo is great, first of all. If you can take photos, you shouldn't be intimidated or think that it's not worth sending a photo if it's not a good photo. But if you can make your photo better, and there's some easy ways to make it just a little bit better to grab attention. So here are some tips. I think the number one tip I would give you is get closer. For example, those 2 photos I showed at the beginning from the school food service training, one was a lot closer than the other, and it was a lot more compelling. We had a character there. Getting close also helps to eliminate distractions in the background of a photo. Also think about your rule of thirds. So don't necessarily center things. Look at the man there at the top. He's kind of in the left third of that photo, and that's more compelling than if it was just a dead-on shot. Find unique angles. Go eye to eye. Watch out for antenna. And this doesn't literally mean antenna necessarily. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it means the utility pole in the background that you don't want sticking out of a kid's head. But it can also mean keeping an eye out for anything in the photo that's going to be distracting. And in the case of a school food service photos that I took and shared earlier, I also want to look out for things like Are those school food service ladies wearing the proper safety equipment for working in the kitchen? And if not, I want to make note that they're at a training. They're not actually working with food that's going to be served. So watch out for distractions. Watch out for things that might get in the way of telling your story. Focus on your subject. Consider the light, and if you can, avoid the flash. Usually it's better to have a photo that's a little too dark than one that's washed out by your flash. So these are some of the things to think about. And like I said, I've been talking generally about storytelling not just for the media, but storytelling for your own blog, for partners who you might want to reblog your content, for organizations like the National Farm to School Network, and sharing stories with us so we can use them in advocacy. I'm going to transfer it over to Stacey now, and she has a few tips that are specific to media as well as some of the other storytelling venues. So go ahead, Stacey.
Thank you, Chelsey. And just to kind of continue the idea around photos, I'll just start by talking about the importance of photos for media here briefly. As you are thinking about media relations and reaching out to media, I'm sure a lot of you have had the experience of reaching out to media with a story idea or telling them about a project that you're working on and getting no response. And then turning around and another day getting an email from them and they need your attention now, in the hour, or today, or in 24 hours. And you're like, hey, you didn't listen to me, but now I need to listen to you. And it builds a frustration, and sometimes it can build a sense of being discouraged around trying to work with media. So I just want to kind of head that idea off right here at the beginning and give you a very short scene of what it looks like to be a journalist these days. For media, as we get more and more online and on social media, so do the journalists and reporters that you're working with. And at the same time, because of the way media is evolving and the internet is evolving, newspapers and a lot of your traditional media outlets in your community are losing staff. So they are actually being asked to cover more topics, cover more types of stories, and beats, as they used to be called. So a lot of newspapers, our local newspaper where I'm based in Portland, Oregon, no longer has an agriculture reporter. The agriculture beat has been absorbed into other reporters. So they're being asked to cover more information as well as more types of media. They are asked to post an early story in the morning, work on their larger stories throughout the day, post videos and social media content throughout the day. So they really are strapped for time, which is why they're not reading your email if it's not capturing their attention immediately. And that's where good storytelling comes into play. So with that they are short-staffed, that's why it's so important to build relationships with media contacts. If you can find somebody who is a little bit interested in school food or local farms, and you can tell because they've been writing about it, you've been reading their work, paying attention to their name on those stories, and you can target them or start nurturing a relationship with them, eventually they're going to start, if you're providing them quality content and they know they can rely on you, they're going to start responding to your emails. So on the idea of photos, while we're still talking about photos and what makes a great photo, because they have very limited time and very limited budget, it's hard for media to travel and get out of the newsroom for stories. So if you have an event and you'd like to use that event as a platform to tell the story of your program or your success, the media or your local journalist may not be able to come to the event, but if you take really great photos at the event and pitch the photos to them after the fact, they may run a story anyways. The way online media works, a lot of your newspaper and other outlets, websites, they're running their advertising programs based on clicks. And the photo slideshows get a lot of clicks every time you click through a photo. So it's actually, photography is really driving the way online media works. So they really want your photos. They're hungry for your photos. So if you take excellent photos and pitch that to them with a story wrapped around it, they may run the story and ask you a few questions without having been able to attend the event. So it's a really good strategy for connecting with them on the level of where they need you. They need content and they need your help to produce that content. So just looking through, again, targeting pitching also means not blasting your entire media list. So I just want to touch on this idea for a minute. Giving media the content that they want, thinking about what their audience wants to know as opposed to what information you want to send them, is how you're going to start gaining their trust. And if you're blasting everyone on your media list, there may be people on there that story or that news item isn't relevant for. So keep that in mind. And if you just have a few media that you really want to target, you may be better off just emailing them personally to try and develop that personal connection. As I kind of continue down this list of tips, I just want to highlight very strongly that putting your story in context and making it timely, these are a couple ideas that Chelsey already touched on in writing a good story, but really important here, I think, are relevant to where we're headed in the next few weeks. You've got some great, timely national news coming here shortly down the pike through the National Farm to School Network. We are working on the Farm to School Act of 2015 and getting that introduced in Congress, hopefully in the next few weeks. We've been talking to you about this for a while now, and that should be coming down the road shortly. When that happens, that's a great opportunity to talk to your local reporters and show them how your work connects to that legislation. It makes it timely, it makes them want to write the story now because they can localize that idea that seems really big and too big for the local community, but when you put it in context of your program, now they can write a story. Also coming down the road at the beginning of March will be the release of the next edition of our state policy report. And when we release that information, that's going to have information on every single state and what types of farm to school policies have been proposed or enacted in each of those states. That is another great opportunity for you to talk about your program and your work in the context of legislation that's happening across the country, whether your state is behind or ahead of the curve. Either way, it makes for a timely opportunity to tell that story of why your program is relevant in your community. So that's where I'm going to stop on the media relations basics for now, but I'm happy to go into more detail in the question and answer period if you have questions. I'm sure there are many, and it's a conversation we can continue to have forever, really, and I'm happy to continue to have that conversation with folks. But I want to move on while we still have a little bit of time here to just touch on another opportunity to tell your story and where you can share that, and that's through partner channels. So Chelsey already mentioned our blog and how we have used some of these stories on our blog before. If you think of us or any other organization that you might like to have your story told through, another like-minded organization, or even outside of the box of just farm to school, or folks writing about school food, as long as you think about what their audience needs and what their goals are and frame your story, put your story in the context of what they need or they want, you can pitch that story to them. Just as you submit your stories to us on our website at farmtoschool.org, we want you to frame your story in a way that makes it easy for us to share. And that's what anyone would be looking for. Nowadays, with online media, with websites that are very content-heavy, blogs and social media, everyone is a publisher. Every organization and brand is a publisher, and they need content to keep feeding that beast. So the easier you can make it for them and have thought through what they would need and put your story in that position, in that context, the more compelling it's going to be for them to roll that into their content strategy. So I'm going to stop there and pass it back over to Chelsey. And let me know if I can cover off on anything else. I'm sure there are questions.
Fantastic, Stacey. Really appreciate it. Great tips there. We like to keep our webinars short so that we can have plenty of time for Q&A. So this is your chance to ask the National Farm to School Network's communications staff to anything that you want about storytelling, communications, media pitching, etc. Just type your questions in now. And while we get started with that, I'm actually going to ask all of you a couple of questions through the poll function here on our website. So if you don't mind taking just a moment and answering this poll. We're looking to know now if you've taken part in one of our webinars before. Just love to know how many new folks we have on the line with us. So go ahead and answer the poll, enter your questions, and we'll start answering those in just a minute. Everyone will remain muted through our Q&A process, so we'll be reading those out loud so everyone can participate. And if you want to get in touch with us, here's a little bit of information about our next webinar. As Stacey mentioned, we have some big policy issues coming up soon. So our next webinar in March is called Making Change, How You Can Support Farm to School Policy this spring. So we're really excited to be working on child nutrition reauthorization, and we want everyone else to be working on it with us. And so get on that webinar in March to join us. If you have any other questions that don't get answered today, you can also send them to me directly at chelsey@farmtoschool.org. Let's see, I'm just reading through our questions now. Here's a comment instead of a question. Here's somebody wants to let us know that there's another storytelling webinar that's similar to this coming up, but a little bit more specific, I believe, to telling your story at events. And that's being hosted by the Oregon Food Bank. So if you go to OregonFoodBank.org, you should be able to find some information about that if you want to dig into this issue a little bit more on another partner's webinar. Here's a question. This person says, my struggle is helping our staff members in the field recognize a good story so they can pass it on to me. Do you have a resource I can share that would help them understand simply what it means to have a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end? This is a great question, and I'll just start by making note that this webinar will be archived on our website. That's one of the questions that we frequently get during our webinar Q&A session. So we are recording this today. These slides and this audio and visual recording will be on our website. So you're welcome to share this link with them if you found this helpful. Maybe some of the examples that we give here and through the Q&A today will be helpful to them as well. We don't have another resource that gives multiple examples of, good and maybe not quite as good stories that's currently on our website. We can give a few verbally. Stacey, do you have anything else you'd like to add here before I go on?
I don't think so. I did want to mention, although it's not about telling the beginning, middle, and end of a story, we do have a media tips document available on the website as well for more information, kind of some more context around the tips that I was running through. And that was available through, it should be in our resources section as well as on a recent blog from just a couple weeks ago. If you scroll through our recent blog, it's linked there too.
Thanks. That's a great reminder, Stacey. I'll say a couple more things about how to help your staff identify good stories, because I understand that can be tricky. I think for one, practice helps. So if you have a blog, and it sounds like you're already doing this, getting other staff involved in writing small pieces for the blog. I think, have them ask themselves every time that they're evaluating something, what's the problem, and then what was the solution? I think that's one of the key ways that you can help transform a list of activities or a list of events into an actual story. So what was the problem that your organization was trying to solve, or what was the problem that a specific individual maybe at your event had before they came to your event? And then what was the solution? So maybe if you have a great kid quote, maybe you can kind of go back a ways and, if you have a kid that came to the garden and didn't used to enjoy eating fruits and vegetables, but at the garden one day the kid said, man, broccoli is the best thing in the world ever. Turn that into a story. You had a problem with a particular child, and then you had a solution. That's kind of the most simple way that I like to think of it. And that's particularly effective, I think, not just for media storytelling, but for communicating to funders, both in seeking funding and then in reporting on grant projects. Here's another question. I work for a nonprofit whose farm to school efforts are quite broad, and I'm tasked with creating a Kickstarter campaign to raise funds. How do I create a concise message to market to donors through a Kickstarter campaign? Do you have any particular input there, Stacey, or do you want me to go with it?
Well, yeah, I can start. I think that with any kind of communication, and especially with fundraising campaigns, it's always going to be strongest if you can find a focus. So if you can fundraise around a specific project or around a specific component of your work, if it's a very broad ask for, as we know, this very complex and dynamic work that we are all doing, it can be a little, it can fall flat. You know, that story can, when you start talking about so much at once, it can kind of overwhelm people, or they can't see exactly what the effect is. So I think maybe even in that Kickstarter format, taking exactly what Chelsey's talking about, a specific story around a child, if that's what you want to focus on, is, you know, here, this is all of the work that we're doing is having this kind of an effect, and give an example story to bring that home. That's going to be stronger. Or finding a specific area of your work to focus on that can feel more concrete for people. Raising this much money will help us do this. If you can put it in those types of contexts, that's going to really help motivate people. When you start pulling those calls to action in, they're going to understand what they're being asked for and what impact that's going to have. So focusing on the impact in a fundraising campaign is going to be another really great strategy there. I'll pass it to you, Chelsey.
Yeah, that's great advice, Stacey. And I'll just add and share with you that that's a frustration I think that we sometimes have with the National Farm to School Network. We are a national network supporting farm to school across the country. It doesn't really get much broader than that in terms of the impact that we're seeking. But and when we talk about what we do, we try to zero in on sharing with people that we provide information, networking, and advocacy for the movement. And to get more specific with that, we love to find examples. For example, telling the story on our blog about someone who came to our conference and through networking and information sharing at our National Farm to Cafeteria Conference to tell the story of how they were able to connect and take that home to their community. So we try to make it specific to try and help people get a handle around the big piece of the work that we do. As a leader of the movement on a national level, it can be a little hard to get your arms around. I can understand that. I also think that finding maybe you don't have to say everything. Knowing what to edit out. Maybe you focus in this campaign, even if it's going to be funding everything, because Kickstarter's maybe not quite as you're reaching the public. You're not applying for a government grant. So maybe if the funding is going to cover a lot of different projects, but maybe in your campaign materials you mostly focus on one piece, I think that's fine.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think the more it's hard to let go of telling every piece of your story, but it's actually going to be more effective if you can let a lot of that go and focus on one element of it. People are going to understand that better. You're going to capture their attention, and they'll be motivated more quickly, as opposed to kind of starting to get lost in all of the detail. I wholeheartedly agree with that, Chelsey.
Awesome. I'm going to bounce another question back to all of you for another poll. Just interested in knowing how this webinar sort of helped you understand our work today. So this will also give you another minute to add another question if we haven't gotten to your question yet. We'll probably take another couple questions before we wrap up for the day. Stacey, I was wondering if you could, while we're working on this poll, if you could talk just a little bit more about how you decide when to use a press release or not. I think a lot of, especially smaller nonprofits, feel some anxiety about their capacity to send out press releases. Do they have the right staff to write them, or is their press release good enough? Do they have the right contacts? And, I know that you're an advocate that that's not necessarily essential to start with. Can you talk through that process a little bit?
Absolutely. I am, I do come from sort of a media background that favors relationships and personal emails with media over heavy focus on press releases. So if I can get away without writing a press release, I think that that's typically the better way to go, and not just from a, not trying to do, spend the time on a press release perspective, but just also from a relationship building perspective with media, that's going to possibly get you further. So with press releases, I think that they should be reserved for cases where you have really hard news. So we are putting out press releases to, when it comes time to announce the Farm to School Act of 2015 bill introduction, we'll put a press release out on that. That's hard news, it's national news. We're going to put that announcement out widely. Also, with our state policy report, that is a report that can be used across the country and provide context and trends, show trends across the country in this type of legislation at the state level. That's another item that we're going to do a press release around. But within your community, even with these two announcements, if your goal is to get coverage in your local newspaper about your program, event that's happening, activities that are happening as part of your program or your organization's work, it may be better to just send an email with a few bullet points to a journalist that you think might be interested in that story, or an editor at that newspaper, and say, hey, here's why I think this story is relevant to you. Here is a little bit of information about it. I'd love to tell you more. Hopefully I've captured your attention in this big, in the information I've provided, and then save some of that extra detail to tell them later. Put it in context, make it timely, give them a couple great stats or a great quote from your program, but you don't necessarily need to write a press release about your program to get that kind of story covered. I'll touch briefly around events, putting press releases or media advisories out around events. I think that sometimes there's really two goals around publicity for an event. You can either be trying to get media to promote your event in advance, and that might be effective to use a media advisory, something that has sort of a who, what, where, when, why format, and sending that to calendar listings editors or that contact at the newspaper. But a lot of events that are happening around your community are not necessarily always going to be media worthy enough for a journalist to come out to the event or to promote the event in advance. But you can use that event as an opportunity to tell a bigger story around your program. So if you actually use that event as your timely hook and invite media to come, or like we talked about before, send them photos afterwards, they actually might write a feature about your organization through the lens of that event. So keep that in mind too. You may not need to be putting press releases out in front of events, but your other channels for reaching your audience might be stronger anyways if you're not seeing media actually cover or put your events in their newspaper in advance. Think about what type of results you're actually getting from each of those press releases, which can be time-consuming to produce. Does that cover us on it, Chelsey? Is there anything, other questions that you feel like popped up from that explanation that I could touch more on? Chelsey, I think you're on mute.
Oops. Sorry about that, some audio trouble today. So that was great, Stacey. That explanation was excellent. And I think the only thing that it made me think about a little bit is that I think particularly when you're working at a smaller nonprofit and maybe you wear a lot of hats, giving yourself permission to do what's really possible, giving your permission to say no to certain pieces of to certain communications channels, giving yourself permission to not write that press release because you don't really have, it's not really something in your wheelhouse. You don't really have the time. Give yourself the permission to send just a short email to a journalist instead. Don't go into it thinking that to be a professional, you have to be, you have to be on every social media channel. You have to be sending press releases. I think that successful communications can take a variety of forms, and knowing your capacity and doing well within that capacity is a lot better than spreading yourself too thin.
Definitely. And I think on the, you have to ask yourself, am I creating a press release to say that I put out a press release? Or is my goal really to get coverage? And if spending the time you would have spent on that press release, spending that time instead on building a personal relationship with a reporter at your local newspaper actually gets you that story in the newspaper, in the end, that time spent on that personal email and targeting that reporter specifically or nurturing a relationship with them might end up in more results in the terms of actual coverage than your press releases have.
I think that's fantastic. Very, very good advice. I think we're at the end of our question session here. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. I appreciate everyone for taking a moment to answer our polls. Did you have any closing thoughts, Stacey?
No, I think that covers it for me.
Well, I really appreciate you joining us today, Stacey, and I really appreciate everyone else joining us from all over the country to learn a little bit about storytelling. I do hope that all of you will visit our website, farmtoschool.org, and consider telling us your story on our Tell Your Story forum. We collect stories for use in advocacy work, as well as on our blog, fundraising, etc. And we also like to know what's going on around the country. So I hope that these tips will help you bring a little bit more effective finesse to that story form, all of your communications that in your work you do. And if you have any other questions, just send us an email, and hope to see you next month. Thanks.